Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming or for watching. My name is Natasha Puri. I am a third-year PhD student in the Tetrad program at UCSF. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about writing a statement of purpose for graduate school applications. So what is the statement of purpose? It's basically an opportunity to weave together your past research experience, your past academic history, maybe a little bit, and also, more importantly, your personal experiences, and weaving them together into kind of a cohesive story and leading up to how those past experiences have brought you to this point of wanting to go to grad school and how that ties into what your future academic and career goals are. The statement of purpose tends to be about 2 to 3 pages, but length is not the most important thing. Content is. Longer does not necessarily mean better. So if you have a 3-page limit, but you've said all you need to say in 2 pages, you don't need to just add an extra page of fluff. This is a good chance to really tell your story, right? Like, this is the one opportunity in this phase of the application process where they actually get to know you. They will obviously get to know you during the interviews, but to get to that point, you really want to properly communicate who you are and what you want. This is also an opportunity to build up some significant work or any accomplishments that you've had and connect them to your future goals and ambitions. And your goal in writing this should be to make a standout impression to the application committee. The committee is reading so many of these, and I think they do tend to blend together after a while for them. So the more you can stand out, the better. So who is your audience? Who is this application committee? So it actually mostly consists of faculty or principal investigators who are running labs at these institutions. And many of these faculty actually are actively looking for students anyway. So they're pretty excited to be looking at this new pool of applicants and potential graduate students for themselves. So your statement of purpose is a way to convince those faculty why you belong at their institution and maybe even why you would belong in their lab. What do you bring to the table, and how do your own ambitions fit with theirs? And I will say, I mean, don't worry, you don't know, you're not really in control of who's reading this. So if your specific research interests don't exactly align with theirs, that's fine. They really just want to see that you do have a passion for research, just like they do. So what else is your admissions committee looking for? They want to make sure that you are motivated to do a PhD and for the right reasons. For example, some examples are advancing scientific discovery, developing new hypotheses and figuring out how to test them, and just in general pursuing specific career goals that require a PhD. Just briefly even mentioning, like, even if you don't exactly know if you want to do academia or industry, knowing that you're thinking about it and you're trying to formulate a plan for your own, and you think this is basically your way of advancing the scientific field, like, that's really what they want to see. They're also looking for, one key thing that they're really looking for is whether or not you can communicate your science clearly and effectively. Scientific communication is incredibly important, and it's also one way of showing your application or your admissions committee that you will succeed at writing. Something that they don't necessarily always tell you in undergrad when you're getting into these fields is that there's a lot of writing involved. You have to write abstracts for posters and be able to present your work in a short amount of time. And you have to write grants that are always asking for money and why you should get funding for that. And you have to write journals. So you being able to write your science, what you've done in science now, is a really good indication for how you will write in the future. They also want to see that you're uniquely poised to contribute something beneficial to the institution. So, right, having a diversity of perspectives is important for just innovation in general and for generating new and better ideas for research. So how do your own unique experiences help foster this? And I'd maybe you don't think that you're unique, but you are. We all have our own story for how we've gotten to these points. So it's really about taking advantage of what makes you unique and highlighting that on the page. And one piece of advice that I have for if you're worried about being able to talk about your science in a concise way, I think it's really helpful to just like make key bullet points for your research and then try to make some sort of like little elevator pitch. And it could be useful to just talk through it and try to explain your science to someone really briefly and see if you can just give them, the main gist, like a main gist elevator pitch type of thing. It's good to talk to someone like even not in that field or not even in science at all. And this is also really good practice for interviews. So you should just do this in general. And if you have trouble with trying to like concisely talk about all your research because there's a lot to say, that's okay. That's totally fine and it's understandable. And a lot of people have issues with this. My tip would be to write what you think is important, just like blurt it all out on a page and then kind of revisit that, and you can trim it down, cut out things that you, after doing a second or third pass on it, realize aren't as important to mention. And I think that could also really help. So just getting everything that you want on the page and then cutting from there, I think can be helpful. So the structure of the statement of purpose usually starts with an introduction, as most things do. Your introduction shouldn't be terribly long, like it should not be a full page, maybe a third of a page. And this is really where you're introducing yourself and setting the stage for the essay. And you want to make it interesting because you want to just catch the reader's attention. I always think it's good to have like a really good like opening line because I think that really reels them in. It can be like a fun or compelling story about yourself, so they just like immediately get to know you, and then you can finding a fun or unique way of connecting it to your science and interest is also key. So the second part of your SOP will be the body, which will be like the main chunk of it. It's like a page to a page and a half long. And this is where you're describing your main goals and motivations for pursuing a PhD. This is where you talk about your past research experiences and just your personal experiences and how they have contributed to your own unique perspective and how that has also contributed to what your current and future goals are. So it's important to highlight your accomplishments here, and highlight meaning like really highlight, like actually you can put it in bold, like what the things that you want the reader to pay attention to. And then finally, your conclusion will be the last bit, also probably like a third of the page. And you do want to rehash the most important things that you want the committee to focus on. You're kind of summarizing and bringing it all to a close here. And again, because they're reading through a lot of these, this is a good focal point to just focus on and just rehash what your goals are and why you think you're a good fit for that institution. So what should you elaborate on? You want to elaborate what your own reasons are for getting into science, like what drives you to do science and what are you passionate about. They also want to know about the various research projects you've been a part of, like, and that means anything that you've done in like a lab. And they, more specifically, you don't want to just like list things you did. You want it to be a nice story, right? So what was the goal of the project, or what was the main question, and what was your specific contribution to that project, and what did you learn from it at the end? And if you do have room, if there's only a couple things that you've worked on, like what are the potential next steps that you could think about. Also, if you do have any publications or if you've presented at a conference, if you presented a poster at a conference, that's important to mention and to highlight. And lastly, you do want to talk about how this past research has brought you to the point where you're at now, where now you want to like really dive into science. Another thing that is good to bring up is instances where you were problem solving or thinking really critically, especially in the context of doing research or in lab. Like if there was some obstacle that happened in lab that you had to overcome. Also, just talking about what ways you've worked independently, but also in a team. Like if you ever worked together with a group, or if you even had another like undergrad that you like helped mentor. Any of those things are important to talk about. And also, just one thing I want to say is, even if there was just one little, it depends on your situation, but if there's like one little research experience you had and you don't even think it's cool enough to bring up, but you need to add more to what you've done, like research wise, just bring it up. Like you can make things sound cooler than they are. That's what we all do all the time. And that's how people even get funding for their science now. But it really depends on the person and what else you've done. Like if you've done a lot of other like bigger projects and you don't really need to elaborate on that, then that's fine. But if not, then you don't automatically rule things out that you think like aren't like cool enough. So things that you want to avoid, you definitely don't want to get caught up in the nitty-gritty details of things. You want to engage the reader through telling a story. You don't want to just list the things that you've done. And you definitely don't want to get specific in terms of like protocols or techniques, because the PIs don't want to hear about it. Like if you can talk about it in an overall way, they assume that you know the technique or you're familiar enough with the technique. You don't need to show that you can write up that technique necessarily. So you really do want to convey the big picture of each research experience that you had. Definitely don't ramble and leave out fluff, and don't just like pad up things and add extra like fluffy sentences just for the hell of it. It's helpful to divide the body section of your SOP into thematic subsections, almost like chapters in a book, because that really helps you have a cohesive story then. They are basically like chapters in a story that lead up to this culmination of what your future ambitions are, which is going to grad school and being at this institution. And again, be as concise and clear as you can, because the admissions committee does not have a lot of time to get through your personal statement. Other things to avoid, yeah, maybe don't highlight high school accomplishments if there's other things that you could highlight that you've done in undergrad or just after high school in general. Unless you did research as a high school student, that is important to talk about. Like any research you've done in any capacity, I think is important to mention. But other than that, I would devote less time and attention to high school accomplishments. Also, don't focus too much on classroom success. So maybe it's important for your story to talk about something in your academic history that has brought you to this point. But other than that, the school has seen your transcripts, they know your grades and know what classes you took. So you don't really need to focus on it too much. Okay, some tips that you should know are that you definitely want to mention specific faculty members that you're interested in doing research with. So for each school that you're applying to, it's good to just like go through some lab pages just to get a brief idea of what some of the research that you could potentially be interested in, what research is going on at that school, and bring and specifically name drop those faculty that you have that you think you could possibly like to work with them. It also could be helpful to look through their papers, or just again looking at their like lab pages and look at what recent research projects they've worked on, and you could use that as a way of tying in your own research and how that fits in with what you want to do in the future. You could also look at what grants that they're working on. I think that's a little overkill. I think that it's an option for sure, like if you really want to get into the specifics of what they do. But I think just getting a general overview of what they work on is good enough, is sufficient. So also expect your admissions committee member to spend like 5 to 10 minutes briefly kind of scanning through your personal statement. So it's really good to just make it easy on the eyes. Like you effectively use your white space, like having extra spaces between paragraphs, and really definitely bold or italicize specific things that you want them to notice. I think bolding is better personally. But yeah, just like blatantly bold the things that you want them to see, because that's where their eye will gravitate. Another way to use white space properly, like you don't want a whole wall of text. You don't want like a really, really long paragraph that just like is a wall. So if you do have something like that, finding a way to break that up into 2 or more paragraphs would be really helpful. So another thing that you should do is cater each statement of purpose to the institution. So it's good to have a general template where you're talking about your past goals, like basically your story. But then when you kind of move towards why your story allows you to fit into that institution, that's where you want to make it more customized to the specific institution. So one thing to really remember is to change the names of the institutions, because you probably will have a template that you're working off of, but definitely make sure that you have the right name for the right institution, because that is not a good look to have a different institution for named in your application. Right, and institutions will be looking for whether you are a good fit for them and vice versa. And another thing is to follow the prompt if given one. So you have a template, but sometimes they have a very specific prompt and specific things they want you to address. And if that's not necessarily addressed in your template, make sure to customize what you have so that it fits that prompt and that school. So some resources that you can take advantage of for applying is, if your school has a writing center or a writing office, that's definitely a good thing to take advantage of. They won't be experts of the content, but they will definitely help for just editing and for clarity and for grammar and just in general proofreading. It's good to get other eyes on this. Having your PI and or your direct mentor read it is also really important. And even just getting like fellow lab members or just like your peers to read it through too is helpful. I have some helpful websites and slides here that I think you'll be able to have access to. I think you have access to this PowerPoint. I will just say that there is a caveat of having too many people give input, and that can be really overwhelming, especially because people could have opposite opinions on things. Like someone could tell you to take something out, and another person the next day could tell you to like, no, you need to like keep that in. I think what just ultimately it's your story. So you take people's input and decide what's best for you and decide what you want to do with that input. Um, I just think like the more people that read it, the better, but still don't lose yourself in other people's opinions at the same time. I hope that helps a little bit. Um, and yeah, that's it. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, that's my email right there. Feel free to reach out. Like seriously, I'll like if you just want to have questions in general about grad school or about UCSF, or if you want me to directly like edit your essay, I'd be happy to. I will also be at the Q&A session. I believe that's on the 16th of October. So I'll be around there if you have any questions. And I'll also be there on the 23rd of October helping with essay editing. So there's lots of opportunities to ask me anything. But thanks again for listening. Goodbye and good luck.